So we're doing this series on what in the world is going on. And we live in an unusual time because of all the things that happen. And as we talked about last week, because we live in a time also that when they happen, you're probably going to hear about it, even if it's halfway around the world. I mean, if you've been watching the Olympics, which I love to do, I still remember when I was a kid and you couldn't get very much of the Olympics. Now it's almost like you're there and they're popping you around all over the place to see all these events. I mean, it's just incredible. The world is different. The world is changing. And somehow, as it goes through these changes, it can be confusing to us to figure out what is going on. One of the things that I like is the fact that Israel is back in the picture in a way that it's never been before. Jerusalem is back in the picture in a way that it's never been before. I'm going to talk about a little bit about why that matters and how that ties us into Jerusalem and into Israel. So I call this message, All Roads Lead to what? Yeah, it says Jerusalem, but you know the phrase comes from all roads lead to, yeah, and this was the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, before that actually several hundred years before that, and then for 500 or 600 years as the Roman Empire sort of dominated the known world. And the Roman Empire wanted you to know that everything not only ends up leading to Rome, it was all the roads that they built, right? Eventually they built, I think it's like 250,000, 250,000 miles of roads going through all the world. But what it really meant was all things come from Rome. That's what they wanted you to understand. So whatever you have, the prosperity you have, the good life you have, everything in your life actually comes from Rome. There was a monument, something that was there in Roman days called the Millennium Aureum, and it was a monument, a statue, something that basically said from here, everything, everywhere you go comes from this one place, and it was situated in Rome. I think there's some remnants of it still there. And it was Rome's understanding or their idea, their propaganda, their social media that they controlled were the originator, were the source of everything in your life. And so it takes me back to Jerusalem, it takes me back to Israel, it takes me back, to the book of Genesis and said, but wait a minute, where did it all come from? Where did it all originate? Here's the interesting thing about Rome. The Romans tolerated the Jewish nation for a long time, and the reason was because they believed that the Jewish God, his origins, were older than their gods were. And they had respect for that. So they didn't wipe that out or that belief out because of that respect that they had for the Jewish God and their worship of him. But then later they got tired of the Jews and they wiped out Jerusalem anyway in 70 AD. But if you look back and you try to figure out where did it all come from, where did it all start, the Bible is an incredible story of that. In fact, that's what Genesis 1 is. It's the idea that in this world, in the physical world we live in, God himself created and God designed, and everything came from God. And then, of course, the story, we all messed up, sin came into the world. It actually talks about God was disappointed that he made the world because of the evil, the violence that was in the world. And then God comes up with a way of trying to rescue the world, to redeem the world. And he's going to use a guy we're going to talk about, the guy named Abraham. So I asked this question in your outline, does everything have a starting point? Does everything have a place that it comes from? And I know you may think, well, I'm not so sure because I don't know where my starting point was or where my family or where, but as science studies that we always realize, but it had to come from somewhere. It had to have some sense of a starting point from where it began. I put a map in your outline because I like maps and I like history. And if you look at the map, I put it there because this is about Abraham. I know you say, wait a minute, I thought you said Jerusalem. Yes, but even Jerusalem came from somewhere. Because in Abraham's day, as best we can tell, he might have been referring to Jerusalem when he refers to Salem and Melchizedek. He comes out and meets him. Not exactly sure, but there's a good chance that's what he was referring to. And in Abraham's life, there's this point where Abraham sacrifices his son, or he goes to sacrifice Isaac back to God. And at that place that he goes, there's a good chance that that could be where the temple was actually built. Once again, Mount Moriah that he talks about, not exactly sure. You have difference of opinions, but there's a good possibility. I'm not telling you that the physical piece of ground is magic or is somehow sacred in and of itself. It's sacred because God chose to do things there. And if you even look throughout the Bible, even at the end prophecies in the Bible, that still will be a key place as Jesus comes back and he returns. Why? Because God chose to do that, and God can do whatever he wants to do. So if that's the place that he chooses, that it's important. Let me show you this map, which I thought was interesting for you to kind of figure out who Abraham was. This is a map. It's my kind of map. A little bit of cartoon to it, a little animation to it. And if you look, there's a path in the map for where Abraham came from. If you see down to the bottom right, Abraham came from a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. And so this area of the world is where the Euphrates and the Tigris come down to the south near the Persian Gulf. Today, this would be in Iraq, on the border of Iraq and Iran. And it was a key place in the world because if you see on the map, you'll see Babylon there. Babylon, pretty significant. Nineveh, a little further north. And if you follow, this will be really interesting for you. If you follow the trail of Abraham as he goes up to Haran, which is where he leaves and he goes to, because God told him, I'm going to lead you to a different place. Abandon your life, abandon your city, abandon your family. But they actually, a lot of them go up to Haran and they live there. And then there, God speaks to Abraham again and he goes down further south. If you follow that trail, so it's kind of a blue line on your map, you know what that's actually called later by historians as they look at it? It's called the Fertile Crescent. So it's in the shape of a crescent as that goes, and it goes down into Egypt. And it's the place where they believe, if you look at it, civilization flourished and civilization grew out of. And I think it's interesting. I didn't get this from any of those historians. They don't say this. It's just interesting to me that it's the same path that Abraham takes. And the reason is the Euphrates River goes up like this, and that's part of that crescent. And if you get up into Haran, then you come down, you got the Mediterranean Sea. And you have the River Jordan and its tributaries that come out of Lebanon and other places that feed it. And then it goes down into Egypt, part of the Fertile Crescent also, with the River Nile, the Nile River and the delta that's there. And all these places are really good places to grow things, to produce crops, to have a life, to build a civilization, which they understood would have been necessary. This is the path that Abraham walks. Not because he knew anything about that. It's just the most natural way for him to travel and to go through life. And so he goes down. He eventually ends up in Egypt. If you know the stories of Abraham in Egypt, because there was a famine in the land. It wasn't as good as it had been. Then he comes back, and he doesn't have a child. And God's going to give him promises, and they're kind of strange because Abraham and Sarah have no children. So how can those promises, how can they work? And he promises him a land that Abraham never really inhabits. He never really has, but Israel does one day. And this land, we would call Israel now, and Jerusalem the city. And now it has come back. 1948 is when Israel was reestablished as a nation after World War II. But it actually had been going on before that. In 1920, the Balfour Declaration came forth, which established, the British government kind of led the way to establish a Jewish homeland in what we would call the land, at that time they're calling it Palestine. But it actually was even before that, because in the 1800s, there was a thing called Zionism, a resurgence of this idea among Jewish people, especially out of Russia, because they were persecuted in Russia, and many lost their lives in Russia. And there was the idea that they would never be free, and they would never be a people again, and what they could be until they returned to their homeland, till they returned to the place that God had promised them. Well, it was impossible in the 1800s when this came about. It still seemed impossible as you go into World War I. But because of their influence and because of the people that they knew all of a sudden the possibility grows, the Balfour Declaration, and then at the end of World War II, Israel becomes a nation again after 2,000 years, and everybody's just kind of blown away. How can this happen? So let me tell you one part of that. Israel, as the Jews are scattered, they didn't lose their connection to God. I'm not saying they were always the most faithful to God, because they weren't, and that's one of the reasons that God dealt with them the way he did. But somehow God kept them together, the promises that he gave them. I think it's because for you and I as Christians, we're part of those same promises. We're tied to them because Jesus was the fulfillment of what they were looking for in life. And so we are tied to them, which is why Christians and churches historically have been real supportive of Israel. There are times when they weren't. Especially during, sometimes during the Crusades, they weren't as supportive as they were before. But in general, they've been supportive because they realize we are tied to them. I know you're saying, and so what does that have to, okay. It means God has always had a plan. And the plan doesn't work out the way we think, the way we want it to work out, but it works out according to how God plans for it to work out. And you and I, through Jesus Christ, have become a part of that. We're tied into that. And so what happens in Israel should be for us a great encouragement. That God is still not finished with Israel. He's still not finished with Jerusalem. He's still not finished with the descendants of Abraham, who was the beginning of the Jewish people. And just as we are tied also to that. Does that make sense? No, okay. I can see the look on your face. And that may be a lot to handle all at one time. I told you I like the movie The Kingdom of Heaven. So in The Kingdom of Heaven, there's a guy named Balian who is called the defender of Israel. He's fighting in the Crusades, and he's fighting the Muslim leader, Salahuddin. And they meet because Jerusalem is about to fall to Salahuddin and the Muslim forces. And they meet. There's this wonderful scene where he goes out, and he's not going to surrender no matter what. And Salahuddin offers him an offer he can't refuse. I'll let you all leave and in peace and go to your ships and just leave. And so he accepts the offer. And in the movie, it's so good. They do such a good job. He stops Bailey and says, "What is Jerusalem worth?" And Salahuddin says, "Nothing." And he turns around as he says that, and then he stops. And he turns back and he goes, "Everything." So I know that you may think the same thing. What is Jerusalem worth? What is Israel worth to us? What is Abraham worth to us? In a sense, as far as the land, the history of it and all that, maybe nothing, because it's a place, it's got its ups and downs, and yet at the same time, if you really think about it, it's worth everything, because it speaks of God working through people, God working through history. Good times come, bad times come. Rescue comes, then all of a sudden captivity comes. And yet God still has his plan. He's working through his plans to an ultimate end. And as I like to say, if you ask me, just let you know, because I have people still say, "I can't wait to see what you say next." I don't know what that end is, except I know that he has it. And it's a good end for us. But I don't know how it's all going to work out. It's still built on a trust in God, in who he is and what he does. There's this great chapter in Isaiah. So Isaiah writes in time, he's like 8th century BC, and he writes in time of captivity and before the Judah is taken captive once again, the people in Judah. And as Isaiah writes, you get to the 34th chapter of Isaiah, and it's really bad because he talks about all the bad things about to happen. Then it goes into this chapter, the 35th chapter of Isaiah. If you've never read it, you should read this chapter. I really encourage you. It's a great chapter. And he talks about the land, the desert, blooming again. And it's just this beautiful picture of what will happen and what will occur. Did it happen in Isaiah's day? Or it did. And at the same time, it's also a picture of what is to come even for us. When we were last year, when we were in Jerusalem, I was looking and watching and talking to some Jewish people. And one of the things that they referenced was Isaiah 35. And they looked at their land and said, "Look, it's bloomed again. The desert has bloomed." It's a wonderful picture for us. Is it the final picture? No, it's not the final picture of what Isaiah is talking about. But there is a temporary or short-term fulfillments of it to remind us that God is still working, still doing what he says that he will do. Even in it, it talks about the blind seeing and the lame walking and people receiving life back, which I think is a reference to Jesus himself. But it's also a reference, even after that, to what is to come, which is why we get our hope from him. So here I go. Here we are in Genesis chapter number 12. This is about Abraham, and this is where Abraham has already left Ur of the Chaldeans. He's gone up to Haran, and there he is living with his family. And this is what it says in verse number 1. The Lord said to Abram, because that's his name before it changed to Abraham, leave your native country, your relatives, your father's family, and catch this, and go to the land that I will show you. Now why wouldn't he just tell him where, or give him an address, right, so he can plug it into his GPS? Because the whole point is that God himself is the one who will lead him, and that is the key. And every time we fall into trouble, same thing happened with Israel when they would fall into trouble, is when they failed to trust him or to believe him. And many times that's because they just thought they'd figured it out themselves. They just thought, no, we know the answer now, or now that we've got the promise of God or the blessings of God, we'll go off and do our own thing, which always put them in a bad spot because the relationship was so key. That's why last week we finished with the parable of the soil, the parable of the sower, the parable of the seed. The sower, he sows the word of God. The seed has life in it. It has life. So you don't have to produce the life. The seed itself has life. But the key in the parable that Jesus is talking about, where does the seed land? If the seed lands on good ground, it will grow and it will produce. If it lands on bad ground or rocky soil, yesterday we were talking about how when you go there, there's rocky soil everywhere there. I mean, there are just rocks everywhere. And you think, man, how does anything grow here? Yeah, it just gets crowded out. It has no place for its roots to grow. If it falls in bad soil, we are the soil, it doesn't grow. So the question is always, what are we? Are we those who are receptive, who will listen, who will say, God, I trust you. You speak, you teach me. I'll go where you want me to go. I'll do what you want me to do. That's Abraham's life. And even then, Abraham struggled. He struggled a lot, just like you and I would. Abraham follows. God promises he's going to promise him a future, a family. And even then, when it doesn't happen, and it did not happen right away, Abraham starts rethinking. You ever done that? Maybe God doesn't really know what he's doing. Or maybe God says one thing, but maybe I'm supposed to go fix it myself instead. And so Abraham and Sarah, they take Sarah's handmaid, one who they picked up in Egypt, and she becomes the mother of a child of Abraham. It was not the plan. And there's a conflict in Israel at the time, and there's a conflict still now that rages between the child of promise, Isaac, and the child that they kind of figured out themselves. There's a conflict there because the whole core of who they are is two different places. Now, it doesn't mean that Ishmael and the people of Ishmael have no hope. God even says in the prophecy, no, he still looks out after us. We're Gentiles. We're not Jewish. But yet we have been put into the promise. We've been brought in because of who Jesus Christ is. So he's going to follow the land and go to the land that he's shown. In verse 2, he says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make you famous. And you will be a blessing to who? To who? Others. Yeah, it's Abraham and his family. And all of his descendants were supposed to be a blessing to other people. He says, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on the earth will be blessed through who? Through Abraham and through the Jewish people. And because of that, that's why I say it all starts with or all goes through Jerusalem, or it goes through Israel, or maybe a better way would have put it, it all goes through Abraham. I just thought it would be more controversial if I said Jerusalem. So anyway, that's why I put it on there. I just thought it'd be fun to throw that out there. So if you go down in chapter 15, this is later, this is Abraham who is following this this new path that he's going to struggle with following. And that is that the land that he's looking for is called, I named it, trust in God. That's the land he's looking for. Trust in God. Believe God. Follow God. However God spoke to him and led him, he's supposed to trust God, and God would be faithful. And he struggled back and forth with that. And this is what it says in verse 15, or chapter 15. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, do not be afraid, Abram. I will protect you, and your reward will be great. In other words, it'll be way more than you ever thought you would have gotten in life if you trust me and if you believe in me. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord. Here we go. Here are those struggles, right? O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have what? An heir, a son. Yeah. So you promised me. You promised to make a great nation. You promised to bless the whole world, the families of the world through me. I don't even have a child. So how can that happen? See, this is the way life works. So many times you're going to run into, I understand your promises, God. I just don't understand how they can happen because I haven't figured them out yet, and I can't chart the path myself. But it's still built on you believing God, you trusting God, you trying as best you can, even with all your faults, to be faithful to God and following God. So the reason I say that is because, look, we all have got things that we go through, things that we didn't count on, that we didn't plan on, things that we thought would have turned out differently in life. What are those things that you have, that you're struggling with? Because they're there, just like Abraham had them. And God still gives promises so that we would trust him and hold on. And even when we fail and God corrects us, we still go back and we say, yep, but you're still the one that I trust in. You're still the one that I turn back to because I know that you have plans and I want to be a part of those plans, your plans, not the ones that I work out, even though you still work out your life and your plans, but you still want to be a part of the plans that God has for you. If you look down and skip down into verse number 4, it says this, then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son, your own son, who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and he said to him, look at this picture. He says, look up at the sky. You should do this one day. Go out in a place where you can just look at the sky. Look up in the sky, count the stars if you can. You can't. Then that's how many descendants you will have. And Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his, say this with me, because of his what? He believed God. He counted him as righteous as if he lived a righteous life because he trusted God, not because Abraham never did anything wrong or Abraham never broke any law or any rules. Just to let you know, there was no law at this time as far as the Jewish people were even concerned. But his righteousness came from the fact that he believed God, that he trusted God. My kids were younger. We had a pool, actually twice we built a pool and had a hot tub. And my favorite thing to do was during the cold part of the year was to go out into the hot tub, take some oranges, things like that. I could talk my kids into go out and get in the hot tub for 30 minutes or so with me, maybe take some candy, I don't know, whatever, anything to get them out there and to sit in the hot tub. Unfortunately, the chihuahuas came out too and tried to eat everything, but still, they get cold, so during the winter, they're going to run back into the house. So, I would sit out there in the hot tub with them, and one of the things we would do almost every time is we just look up at the stars, and we just say, wow. So the God that we know that has revealed himself to us is the same God that did all this. You understand it? No. It's beyond what I can possibly understand. It's just way beyond me. But he understands it. He created it. He made it. And again, that you may be here thinking, I don't believe that. That's fine. I'd love to hear another theory and that makes sense because I'm pretty scientific, and it doesn't make any sense to look at the universe and to look at living things and to say, and there's no design, there's no pattern, it's just random. doesn't fit anything that we understand about life. It's just that we can't comprehend God. We can't comprehend someone who could do this. But if you understand it and you believe it, because it's been revealed to you, and say that, the God that did all this is also working out plans that I can be a part of. Yes. He's working out history itself, and he invites me to trust him and to believe him. Will it be easy? It will be hard to do that, because there will be so many times where I will think, I've got a better idea. God, I'm not sure you're going to work this out the way I want you to work it out. I have a better idea of how to work this out in the way that I would like. But the problem is when I do that, what I'm doing is I'm saying, I'm going to go a different way, God, than your way. When I trust him and I say, I'm going to go your way, even if it's hard, even if it's painful, listen, then God is faithful. And I have a possibility of understanding God's faithfulness. My joy in life, one of them right now, is grandkids. And I love my grandkids, and my daughter has 3 girls. And I give them all names now. I kind of characterize them. I don't know if you do this, but I do. And I have to be careful of saying my characterization sometimes. So the oldest one, I look at her and I call her, she's the conniver. She's the one that can think, and she's the schemer in life. And she's smart, and she works things out. And she can be sometimes a little sneaky, and I love her, and she knows that I love her too. Because with every gift, just let me tell you also, if you're thinking, you're talking about my kids, with every gift, there's a good side and there's a bad side. They both come together. You don't get gifts without the good side and the bad side. How are you going to work them? So that's who he should. But then the one that just turned 4, the 4-year-old, I call her the screamer. She's the fighter. So she's the one that whatever you want her to do, she's going to fight it, And if you say, time to go to bed, oh my goodness, she's going to lose it. She's going to scream. She's going to have the most sorrowful look on her face. You're going to feel sorry for her. She knows how to work it and just react. You can't leave to eat your dinner. She's just going to lose it on everything. That's who she is. It's her great strength, but it's also her great weakness. This is one of the things I love about what my daughter and her husband have figured out. If you're going to deal with the screamer, the fighter, there's only one way you can deal with him. I know you're going to think probably the opposite of the way it is. You got to have patience. Oh, don't tell me that. No, you got to lay down. No, you got to have patience with the screamer. Patience with the fighter. Because if you're patient with them, they come around. They figure it out. They know this is the one that loves me. This is the one that cares for me. So even though I don't like the idea, it's not what I want to do, eventually come around. And with children, it actually doesn't take long at all. They quit screaming and fighting pretty quickly, and they adapt to it and they come in. And I know that sometimes you have to discipline. I don't doubt that. But you have to have great patience if you want to raise children. You do. It's the only thing that works. It's the only thing that shows great love. God has great patience with us, with me, with you. He does. He puts up with a lot. He allows us to mess up a lot. He knows we're going to complain, gripe, scream, holler about things because we don't like them. God has incredible patience. Actually, the Bible makes this really clear that it's God's patience that draws us to him because we see God's compassion in the middle of that. It's the same way with Abraham. God had great patience with Abraham, his mistakes, the things that he did wrong. And Abraham eventually came around, but it's not without struggles. And I put this, the last 4 verses in chapter 15 says this. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I've given you this land, the land to your descendants, all the way from the border. Catch this, how big this was. From the border of Egypt, he gave them the land from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River. That's pretty amazing that it was that huge. The land now occupied, it was occupied. And yes, that's the way life works. That land is occupied. That's all right. I'm going to give it to you. The land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites. Anybody want to try the next one? It comes from Raphaim. The Raphaites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, and the worst one of all, the Cellulites. Those, yes, those those that we holler about and we scream about and we say, God, but I don't like this. And it's already occupied. That's okay. God gives us things that seem to be occupied with something else. If we will exercise patience and if we will trust God, God is the one who delivers and he gives good things to us. I put in your outline, you're going to have 3 enemies in life, at least 3 enemies in life. So understand this, and I know that this won't necessarily be, popular in some modern thought. The first enemy you have is Satan himself. There's an enemy who is spiritual in his nature, and he has incredible influence and power over people. He is the great deceiver. He's the one who tempts and says, I'll give you this if you will, follow my ways instead. And he's always a liar. So he never delivers on what he promises. That's why everything that he promises seems to be good, and then all of a sudden it's not good, because that's the nature of who he is. But Satan himself is spiritual in nature. He's spiritual in nature. And we have to fight against that. The second is the world itself. Now, I'm not talking about the planet. I'm not talking about the flowers and the trees and looking up at the stars. But what I'm talking about is there's a way that the world operates because of sin and because of the enemy, that it goes against God. That the world tries to say, but we can figure it out ourselves. We can do it ourselves. And we're going to push back against God and not follow him and trust him because we want to control this. You go back to Genesis chapter 3. There's a beautiful picture, it's a wonderful picture of Adam and Eve being tempted by the world around them not to trust God, and being tempted by the spiritual deceiver, Satan himself. That says the serpent was craftier than all the other, So that was the way he approached them. And they fell for it. He pointed out that, God has limited you. He's holding you back. He's not letting you experience your full potential that you could experience if you would go against God, because he is a deceiver. And he did it by using the world. And it even says with the tree, it's one of my favorite illustrations. I think it's just such a great illustration that Eve looked at the tree and she saw that the fruit of the tree that she wasn't supposed to eat of, that God told her, don't eat of it. The fruit of the tree was delicious. I would say in her day, she would have said even, or if it was today, nutritious, probably contained lots of antioxidants and things like that. It was attractive, it was beautiful, yes. And it was desirable because it would give her knowledge that she did not have. Now, how could you say no to those 3 things? Because all of them seem like good things. It's nutritious, it's beautiful, we love beauty, God creates beauty. It gives us knowledge. Can knowledge be bad? Well, it depends on what the knowledge is, of course. What the enemy doesn't do is he doesn't remind her that the price will be severe. Because if you go and you take of the fruit and you eat it, you'll have to go against God. You'll have to reject God to do it. And that's the problem with the world, is there is a temptation of the world that says go this way, and somehow we forget the price if we go in a way that goes against God. That's the way the world works against us. The third thing is the sin that is in us. And there is sin inside of us. It's there. There's a part of us that just says, I want to go my own way, right? Like I said, I've got 3 grandkids. It's in them, just like it was in you. It's in me. We want our own way. We want control. We want to do what we want to do. And that takes us away from trusting God and following God. That's just a reality of life. So here, let me finish up. This is in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews. It kind of ties this together. I think you will like this. This is what the writer of Hebrews, this is New Testament, so this is not Old Testament, just to show you that we're still tied to the same struggles and the same promises that were given to Abraham. This is what it says in verse number 8. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as an inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised, he lived there by faith. For he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac, that's his son, the son of the promise. And Jacob, who is Isaac's son, Jacob will later become Israel, he'll get renamed, who inherited the same promise, just like we inherit the same promise through Jesus. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It's not physical Jerusalem, even though in this world it will still go through physical Jerusalem because it's tied to God himself. In verse 11, it was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child because she's 90 years old when she has a child. Though she was barren and was too old, she believed that God would keep his promise. And so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead, a nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the sea, there's no way to count them. Verse 13, all these people died, still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on the earth. Obviously, people who say such things, listen to this, are looking forward to a country they can call their own. Yes, that's what they're looking for. If they had longed for the country that they came from, they could have gone back, and that wasn't the intention. It's a picture of Abraham going and not going back to the land that he came from. That is why God, I like this, this is why God is not ashamed. He is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Is that amazing? So those who believe him and who trust him, God is not ashamed to be called their God. He loves it because that's what he wants. He wants you and I to look for something, to long for something that is better than this life, better than this world, that is temporary. This world is temporary. But God has something better planned for us. It is by our faith that we're attached to that, attached to him. He says in verse 17, it was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac, the one child that he longed for, right, as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, absolutely a picture of God sacrificing his only son for us. Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able, catch this, to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. If you know the story, God stops his hand, an angel comes as he's to sacrifice his son, and he tells him, I was testing you. I just want to know that you trusted me beyond what you understand, beyond what you are doing. And of course, God was faithful to Abraham, just as he is faithful to us. It's a confusing world, isn't it? And I think in order to get through this world and to move forward to the next steps, we always have to go back and we have to say, where did this come from? Why am I holding on to this? Because it has a long, long history. It's one of the reasons I love the Bible so much, is because the Bible is a historic book. You can go back and find most of these places, these events. They're recorded in other places, and it's a real life story, and yet it is supernatural. It is a God who moves beyond what we understand and beyond what we do for our good, and he's going to take us to the place that he has for us. Let's pray together. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are a faithful God, and that your plans are beyond ours, even though we would all like to know what they are. We'd all like to know or to think that we can understand them and figure everything out. But Lord, the truth is, when we do, we have a tendency to walk away and try to live our lives on our own rather than to walk with you and to know you. Even as we're praying this morning, maybe there's something that you're struggling with that you just can't figure out. You don't understand. You're thinking, but why this? This is not what I thought would happen. This can't be a good thing. But sometimes it's exactly where God wants you. And it's how God builds sometimes trust that even in something you can't figure out, God would be faithful. Let me encourage you, even as we pray, whatever that thing is, this would be a great time to say, Lord, And you can tell him about it because he knows. It's not going to be a shock to him what you're struggling with. And to say, Lord, I trust you. In fact, I have to trust you. So I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make this happen. I don't even know where this exactly will lead. But if you're saying this is the path you want me to walk, this is what I need to go through, and this is where I need to stand and wait and see your rescue, your salvation, and let me go through it. Give me the faith. Give me the strength not to abandon this journey, but to continue to trust you and walk forward, knowing that the day is coming when you will fulfill your promises, that like Abraham and all those who've come before me, Lord, they did not see all the promises fulfilled. But there's a day coming when we will. If you've never put your hope and your trust in Jesus Christ, who in so many ways is a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. He's the one that opened the eyes of the blind and causes the lame to walk and raises the dead. What a wonderful time to say, Lord, thank you for sending your son, your only son, the sacrifice that you had to make in giving him up so that I could have life. I could have someone to trust in who was raised from the grave, knowing that there's a day coming when my life and everything that matters to me will be raised from the grave also. Lord, thank you for your faithfulness. In Jesus' name I pray.